A surveyor's nightmare, a family's curse, the unholy land deal that claimed 89 lives in the Nevada desert. This secret will change you. In 1908, the desert breathed a secret. 89 unmarked graves meticulously arranged formed a perfect silent grid. Las Vegas, a city soon to be built on dreams of prosperity, was already built on bodies, a land deal forged in blood, a chilling truth hidden for a century. This knowledge changes you. It began subtly, insidiously, in the spring of 1908. A railway surveyor, a man of precise measurements working for the relentless Union Pacific Railroad, stumbled upon a discovery that would haunt the very foundations of Las Vegas for over a century. Just 3 years after the city's foundational land auction, while mapping potential expansion routes through the vast, indifferent desert valley, he found it. Hidden behind a cluster of gnarled Joshua trees, approximately 4 miles southwest of the rapidly booming railroad town, lay what appeared to be a small, unmarked cemetery. But what truly disturbed the surveyor, what made his report vibrate with an unspoken dread, wasn't merely the presence of graves in that harsh Nevada landscape. It was the chilling, meticulous arrangement. Exactly 89 burial mounds, each precisely 6 feet apart, forming a perfect grid pattern. A design so unnervingly deliberate, so inexplicable in its precision, that it hinted at an intelligence far more sinister than simple pioneer burials. The surveyor's official report, a testament to inconvenient truth, was immediately sealed in the Union Pacific Railroad archives. There it would remain, a festering secret, until 1987. Its single haunting observation: the soil composition suggests all burials occurred within a concentrated time frame estimated between late 1905 and early 1908. Locals, many of whom had arrived for the famous May 1905 land auction that forge to Las Vegas, claimed no knowledge of any such burial ground. Territorial records, newly formed, showed no permits for a cemetery of this chilling scale. For over 70 years, the railroad quietly rerouted their tracks, and the few locals who knew its truth spoke of it only in whispers, referring to it by a name that still chills the blood: Henderson's Harvest. What you're about to hear is the true story behind those 89 graves. A tale born of the American dream of land ownership, corrupted by greed, and culminating in the most systematic killing spree in Nevada Territory's forgotten history. This is the truth behind the Henderson Family Curse, and once heard, it cannot be unseen. The conclusion of Senator William Clark's infamous land auction on May 15, 1905, marked a terrifying metamorphosis. Overnight, Las Vegas shed its skin as a mere railroad water stop, burgeoning into a thriving, insatiable frontier boomtown. The completion of the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad had unlocked a torrent of opportunity, drawing thousands of desperate, hopeful settlers into the unforgiving Nevada desert. Each carried not just their meager possessions, but the fragile, burning ember of the American dream. A promise of prosperity in America's newest railroad city. A magnet for ambition and for desperation. Among the eager prospectors who arrived in the chaotic aftermath of that initial auction was Jeremiah Henderson, a man etched with the hard lines of bitter failure, 42 years old, a former cattle rancher from Utah Territory who had lost everything, his livelihood, his legacy, to a relentless series of harsh winters and ruinous investments. He reached the burgeoning chaos of Las Vegas in August of 1905, his family trailing him, his devout wife Sarah, their 3 children, and the stark sum of exactly $63. Not enough to secure a prime city lot, not even close, but just enough, perhaps, to establish a desperate foothold in this rapidly growing, utterly ruthless community. Jeremiah, however, harbored ambitions far grander, far more sinister than merely carving out a meager existence. His gaze was fixed on the choice lots near the railroad depot, properties that had commanded exorbitant prices during the May auction and whose value now soared with the city's unrestrained expansion. The problem was stark, unforgiving, Established titans of industry from Los Angeles and Salt Lake City controlled the most valuable real estate, their resources limitless, their influence absolute. A struggling homesteader like Jeremiah had no chance against such power, but in this new, lawless frontier, no chance could be twisted into a terrifying opportunity. The Las Vegas of late 1905 was a raw, untamed beast, a railroad town swelling with a frantic, almost desperate energy. Fortunes were not merely made, they were seized, often overnight, by men who reinvented themselves daily, shedding their pasts like old skin. The population, a chaotic torrent, surged far beyond the original auction buyers, drawing a relentless stream of railroad workers, ambitious merchants, and prospectors lured by the siren call of nearby mining districts. And, inevitably, the shadows followed. The gamblers, the confidence men, the desperate collection of souls seeking opportunity in a place where few questions were asked about a man's past. This relentless influx of transient humanity created a volatile crucible, forging both immense opportunities and profound challenges for families like the Hendersons. The constant stream of travelers, a river of humanity flowing through their homestead, provided a steady stream of customers for their nascent way station. But this very prosperity carried a hidden, venomous sting. It also brought dangerous men, carrying significant rolls of money, through a region where law enforcement was sparse, almost non-existent, and territorial authority remained largely theoretical. Jeremiah, a man whose life had been a brutal education in survival, understood this new landscape intimately. He knew that success in this environment demanded more than mere hard work or honest dealing. It required a chilling kind of bold opportunism, the very ruthlessness that had forged so many frontier fortunes. And Jeremiah Henderson, pushed to the brink by his past failures, was prepared to embrace methods that, in the settled communities he had left behind, would have been utterly unthinkable. He was ready to cross a line, to shed the last vestiges of conventional morality, all for the promise of land and prosperity in this new lawless frontier. The chilling metamorphosis of Jeremiah Henderson, from a struggling homesteader grasping at the last vestiges of dignity to something far more sinister, began on a sweltering September morning in 1905. It was a day etched into the desert's relentless heat, a day that would irrevocably alter the fate of his family and cast a long, dark shadow over the burgeoning promise of Las Vegas. A man calling himself Thomas Edwards arrived at their isolated way station, a solitary figure emerging from the shimmering heat haze. His request was unusual, his story immediately igniting a dark spark of interest in Jeremiah's calculating mind. Edwards claimed to be a former railroad supervisor, a man on the run, fleeing the cold, unyielding grip of embezzlement charges back in California. He carried the visible proof of his illicit gains, a substantial roll of bills, crisp and promising. His gear was of good quality, hinting at a life recently lived in comfort, now abruptly abandoned. But it was his demeanor that truly spoke volumes. A raw, nervous energy, the subtle tremor of a man who understood, with stark clarity, that his very freedom, perhaps his life, hinged entirely upon his ability to vanish without a trace. And then, the chilling whisper that sealed his fate. Edwards had heard rumors. Whispers carried on the desert winds, speaking of certain isolated homesteads in the Nevada territory that provided services far beyond simple food and shelter. Services tailored for travelers with particularly desperate, uniquely illicit needs. This was the opening, the catalyst. The moment Jeremiah Henderson recognized the dark potential in the desperation of others, stepping onto a path from which there would be no return. The clandestine conversation between Edwards and Jeremiah Henderson unfolded in the small, unassuming cabin that served as the family's parlor, a perverse domestic tableau. While Sarah, oblivious, prepared the evening meal, her quiet diligence a stark counterpoint to the darkness brewing, and the children completed their daily chores, the seeds of a monstrous pact were sown. Edwards, his voice a low, desperate murmur, was chillingly direct about his predicament. He needed to vanish, not merely to travel unseen, but to disappear entirely. His previous identity, his very existence, had to be erased without a trace, without any possibility of discovery. He was willing to pay, handsomely. "I've heard," Edwards whispered, his eyes darting, "that a man with money and the right connections can simply disappear out here, become someone else entirely." Then came the number that echoed like a siren's call in Jeremiah's ears. $500 for that kind of assistance. $500. A sum that dwarfed anything the Henderson family had seen in the previous 2 years combined. For Jeremiah, a man haunted by the constant grinding calculus of survival, daily calculating how long their meager savings would last, whether they could endure another brutal desert winter, Edwards's offer was more than an opportunity. It was a test, a brutal, inescapable crucible of his own making, forcing him to confront the chilling precipice of his own morality. Was he willing to abandon the last vestiges of conventional decency, to cast aside the tattered rags of his ethics, all in pursuit of the glittering promise of financial security? The answer, chillingly, came with the night. While Edward slept, oblivious, in the traveler's cabin, Jeremiah entered, quietly, and suffocated him with a pillow. The solution was both simple and monstrous. The first sacrifice had been chosen, the unholy deed sealed. The clandestine conversation between Edwards and Jeremiah Henderson unfolded in the small, unassuming cabin that served as the family's parlor, a perverse domestic tableau. While Sarah, oblivious, prepared the evening meal, her quiet diligence a stark counterpoint to the darkness brewing, and the children completed their daily chores, the seeds of a monstrous pact were sown. Edwards, his voice a low, desperate murmur, was chillingly direct about his predicament. He needed to vanish, not merely to travel unseen, but to disappear entirely. His previous identity, his very existence, had to be erased without a trace, without any possibility of discovery. He was willing to pay, handsomely. "I've heard," Edwards whispered, his eyes darting, "that a man with money and the right connections can simply disappear out here, become someone else entirely." Then came the number that echoed like a siren's call in Jeremiah's ears. $500 for that kind of assistance. $500. A sum that dwarfed anything the Henderson family had seen in the previous 2 years combined. For Jeremiah, a man haunted by the constant grinding calculus of survival, daily calculating how long their meager savings would last, whether they could endure another brutal desert winter, Edwards's offer was more than an opportunity. It was a test, a brutal, inescapable crucible of his own making, forcing him to confront the chilling precipice of his own morality. Was he willing to abandon the last vestiges of conventional decency, to cast aside the tattered rags of his ethics, all in pursuit of the glittering promise of financial security? The answer, chillingly, came with the night. While Edward slept, oblivious, in the traveler's cabin, Jeremiah entered, quietly, and suffocated him with a pillow. The solution was both simple and monstrous. The first sacrifice had been chosen, the unholy deed sealed. The success of the Edwards operation did more than merely solve Jeremiah Henderson's immediate financial woes. It ignited a chilling conviction within him. He had found his calling, a dark, insidious purpose, and within a mere 2 weeks he began to act upon it with the calculated precision of a predator. He moved quietly, subtly, spreading insidious whispers through the crowded, smoke-filled saloons and transient boarding houses of Las Vegas. His homestead, he let it be known, could provide special assistance to travelers, assistance for those desperate souls who needed to vanish, to start fresh in life, to simply disappear without a trace. He was meticulous in his targeting. His gaze, now sharpened by his newfound purpose, fell only upon men who were already fugitives from the law, ghosts of their former lives seeking absolute oblivion. Jeremiah's logic was chillingly sound. Men already on the run, already existing outside the bounds of conventional society, their disappearances would be less likely to attract the prying eyes of investigation. Their pasts were their chains, and he offered them a final, permanent liberation, at a price they would never comprehend. This was not random violence. This was an emergent system, a chillingly efficient enterprise of engineered oblivion. Each whisper, each murmured promise of a new life was a lure, and the desert, vast and indifferent, waited to embrace another nameless soul, marked for special assistance by the man who had found his calling in the silent, systematic taking of lives. His operation, born of desperation, was now fueled by ambition, meticulously preying on the very chaos that defined frontier life. But the dark transformation of Jeremiah Henderson, though hidden from the outside world, could not entirely escape the sharp, intuitive gaze of his own blood. Samuel Henderson, barely a child, yet always an acutely observant one, began to notice subtle shifts in his father's demeanor, disturbing tremors in their family's once predictable circumstances. He couldn't fully articulate the chilling changes, but the gnawing unease that settled in his young mind was profound, deeply troubling. Samuel had seen Edwards arrive at their homestead, a fleeting presence in their isolated world. He had shared meals with the man, even helped him care for his horses, witnessing the mundane rituals of a traveler seeking temporary respite. Then Edwards was gone. His father's explanation was swift, dismissive. Edwards had simply departed before dawn. But Samuel, with the piercing clarity of childhood observation, saw the abandoned possessions, the quality gear, the tools left behind, the very items Edwards would surely need for a journey. His innocent questions, born of genuine curiosity, were met not with answers, but with harsh, chilling warnings about the paramount importance of minding his own business. The command, delivered with a new, unsettling severity in his father's voice, carried a weight Samuel couldn't comprehend but instinctively feared. This was not the usual discipline. It was a psychological boundary, violently erected, a barrier of silence designed to suppress inconvenient truths, to keep a child blind to the monstrous acts that were quickly becoming the foundation of his family's terrifying new prosperity. The boy felt it, the silent, burgeoning horror festering beneath the surface of their quiet desert home. As autumn descended upon the Nevada desert in 1905, painting the harsh landscape in hues of rust and gold, the Henderson family's circumstances began a terrifying transformation. A prosperity, visible and undeniable, blossomed from the dusty earth. It was a change that reflected both the explosive growth of Las Vegas as a booming frontier town and, more ominously, Jeremiah's chilling maturation as a predator. The completion of the railroad connection had indeed brought unprecedented wealth to the region, and the Henderson way station, strategically positioned, reaped the benefits of a constant flowing stream of travelers, railroad workers, and ambitious entrepreneurs passing through their remote outpost. But beneath the glittering surface of this apparent, legitimate success, a far darker enterprise was systematically taking root. Jeremiah had begun, with a cold, almost clinical precision, to develop what he privately termed his disappearing service. The calculated murder of Thomas Edwards had been merely the genesis. Before the close of 1905, 3 more carefully planned killings followed, each mirroring the first in its chilling efficiency. His targets were meticulously selected, men who had actively approached him, desperate souls seeking his unique brand of assistance in escaping their criminal pasts. A former cavalry deserter, his pockets heavy with stolen army payroll. A confidence man fleeing the bitter consequences of fraud charges in Colorado. A cattle rustler, wanted for murder in Arizona territory, his past catching up to him with violent inevitability. Each man, a desperate seeker of a new life, had been drawn to the Henderson homestead by the carefully planted rumors, whispers carried on the illicit winds, speaking of a place where desperate men could find true help in forging new identities, in simply ceasing to be who they once were. Jeremiah Henderson was no longer merely surviving. He was building an empire, one blood-soaked body at a time. Jeremiah Henderson's selection process was as methodical as it was monstrous. There was no room for error, no place for sentiment. He would engage his potential clients in detailed, probing conversations, dissecting their circumstances with the cold precision of a surgeon. His objective, to evaluate not merely their financial resources, the literal price of their oblivion, but more crucially, the likelihood that their disappearances would attract the unwanted scrutiny of law enforcement. Men with substantial money but few personal connections, those untethered souls who sought to shed their pasts with absolute finality, were ideal targets. They were the perfect marks for his chillingly efficient, disappearing service. Those with family members, with business partners, with anyone who might possess the means or the will to investigate their sudden vanishing, were politely, firmly turned away. He was building an empire on the uninvestigated. Sarah Henderson's role in these escalating atrocities was complex, tragic, and utterly horrifying. She was not, initially, aware of the true nature of her husband's nocturnal activities, but a woman attuned to the subtle rhythms of her household, of her husband's soul, could not remain entirely blind. She began to notice the insidious inconsistencies, the sudden inexplicable surge in their financial circumstances, the regular, almost ritualistic appearance and disappearance of travelers at their remote homestead. Her suspicions, at first a faint whisper of unease, grew into a deafening roar as she witnessed the chilling transformation in Jeremiah's very being. A fundamental shift in his personality, a growing, terrifying callousness towards human life, a detachment that spoke of a soul consumed by darkness. The man she had married was becoming a stranger, a monster, and she, by her proximity, by her silence, was slowly, irrevocably being drawn into his complicit orbit. The truth, though unspoken, was a poison seeping into the very foundations of their family. The insidious whispers of suspicion that tormented Sarah Henderson finally coalesced into a shattering, undeniable truth in December of 1905. The breaking point arrived not with a scream, but with the chilling silence of discovery. Her intuition, long suppressed, led her to a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard in their very bedroom, a place where the ordinary comforts of marital intimacy had once resided. There, concealed from the world, lay Jeremiah's journal, a leather-bound book, innocent in its cover, but within its pages, a meticulously documented descent into unspeakable evil. The words, etched in her husband's familiar hand, were a precise, clinical inventory of horror. Detailed records of 7 murders, each entry a chilling dissection of a life brutally extinguished, descriptions of the victims, cold estimates of their financial resources, and the horrifying precision of their burial locations. Sarah's trembling fingers traced the numbers, each digit marking a grave in the silent desert behind their homestead, each a monument to Jeremiah's depravity. But it was not merely the death toll that froze her blood. Most chilling of all were Jeremiah's clinical observations. His cold analysis of each operation, dissecting methods for improvements in efficiency and security, his plans, laid bare in meticulous prose, for expanding his monstrous enterprise. The man she had married was not just a killer, he was an architect of death, a businessman of oblivion, charting a terrifying course for their family's future. The truth, now unsealed, promised not just a glimpse into his hidden agenda, but a terrifying, inescapable complicity in the very curse that now stained their family name. Her world, once built on the shifting sands of the desert, now crumbled into an abyss of blood and unspeakable secrets. The confrontation between Sarah and Jeremiah, ignited by the damning revelations of his journal, was not a desperate plea for mercy, nor a furious outburst of righteous anger. It was a descent into the true abyss of his moral corruption. What unfolded in that small parlor was the chilling clinical dissection of a soul utterly devoid of remorse, a mind that had embraced pure, unadulterated malevolence as a business strategy. Jeremiah expressed no guilt, no revulsion. His voice remained calm, chillingly matter-of-fact, as he laid bare the full, terrifying scope of his plans for their family's future. "These men are already dead," he told his wife, his gaze unwavering, his logic as cold and sharp as a surgeon's blade. "They've committed crimes that have put them beyond redemption, and they can never return to the lives they had before." And then the terrifying perversion of benevolence. "What I'm offering them is peace, permanent peace." His voice a chilling promise of eternal oblivion. "And what they're offering me," he continued, his eyes glittering with a predatory ambition, "is the means to secure our family's future in this new city." His vision, vast and terrifying, stretched far beyond mere blood money. He had meticulously studied Las Vegas's explosive growth, identified specific choice properties near the burgeoning railroad depot. With the cold precision of a prophet of industry, he calculated he would need to complete approximately 89 successful operations, 89 souls extinguished, to generate the precise funds required to purchase these properties and finally, horrifyingly, establish himself as a legitimate businessman. Sarah now faced a chilling choice: complicity or destruction. The unholy pact was no longer merely his. It was now forced upon her, a silent, blood-soaked chain binding her to his escalating madness. Sarah Henderson's response to these monstrous revelations was not a scream, nor a desperate flight into the desert. It was a suffocating, silent horror, compounded by a paralyzing terror for her family's safety. The cold logic with which Jeremiah outlined his depravities, his chilling vision for their future, shattered any illusion she might have clung to. She understood, with a clarity that seared her soul, that Jeremiah had become something utterly monstrous, a predatory force born of the desert's harshness and his own unbridled ambition. But more terrifying than the monster he had become was the grim calculus of her own survival. She understood with a chilling certainty that any attempt to expose him, to break the sinister silence, would almost certainly result in her own swift death. And far worse, the utter destruction of her innocent children. The very act of living, of breathing each day in his shadow, now required an unspeakable compromise. The knowledge that she was married to a serial killer, that the man who shared her bed was a meticulous architect of death, was almost unbearable, a constant gnawing agony. But the true abyss of her despair lay deeper. It was the crushing, suffocating realization that she was now inextricably, irrevocably complicit in his crimes. His blood money fed her children. His murderous ambition now dictated their future. The psychological pressure on Sarah, and indeed on the entire Henderson family, began its inexorable, devastating intensification. They were trapped, bound by a pact not of their choosing, in a home built on graves, under a sky that witnessed everything. The psychological pressure on the Henderson family, already a suffocating blanket of dread, intensified dramatically as Jeremiah's monstrous operation expanded throughout 1906. Their homestead, once a symbol of fragile hope, was becoming a silent abattoir, its prosperity stained with unseen blood. Sarah, trapped in a waking nightmare, wrestled daily with the moral implications of her complicity. Each meal she prepared, each moment of comfort she offered to a weary traveler, was poisoned by the horrifying knowledge that these men were walking, unknowing, towards their meticulously planned demise. She was feeding the sacrificial lambs. But the most devastating impact was on the children. Samuel Henderson, now 13 years old, a boy no longer shielded by the innocence of childhood, began to experience severe psychological distress. His innate observational skills, once a testament to his intelligence, now plunged him into a chilling reality he could neither comprehend nor escape. He had, in his innocent wanderings, located the burial ground, the carefully measured graves behind their homestead, each marked by a silent stone, became a grim, undeniable testament to his father's atrocities. Samuel had seen enough. He understood the full, sickening scope of Jeremiah's crimes. The weight of this knowledge, a crushing burden on a child who still clung to the vestiges of love for his father, was almost unbearable. He could no longer deny that the man who was meant to protect him had become a monster. Young Mary and little Rebecca, shielded by their tender years, remained largely unaware of the true nature of their family's grim circumstances. But even their innocent eyes could not miss the suffocating tension between their parents, the palpable fear radiating from their mother, and Samuel's increasingly withdrawn, haunted behavior. Their innocent questions about these chill-ing changes, sharp as needles, added another excruciating layer of stress to an already impossible, unspeakable situation. The family, once a unit bound by love, was now held together by a shared, horrifying secret, and it was tearing them apart, one terrified breath at a time. As 1906 bled into its chilling conclusion, Jeremiah Henderson's enterprise metastasized. His victims, once confined to the immediate desperate flow of Las Vegas, began to arrive from distant horizons, a testament to his growing insidious reputation throughout the Southwest. Railroad workers, unwitting conduits of his dark advertising, spread whispers of the Henderson homestead through their intricate networks, painting a picture of a haven for those seeking a fresh start. Wanted men, from the sun-scorched plains of Texas to the golden promise of California, now sought the special services Jeremiah so chillingly provided. Each successful operation, each fresh grave meticulously dug in the desert's indifferent embrace, fueled Jeremiah's escalating confidence and insatiable ambition. He began charging higher fees, his gaze now fixed on wealthier targets, men whose disappearance would yield a richer harvest. His mind, utterly consumed by the dark calculus of expansion, began charting plans for an eventual empire of oblivion, a monstrous enterprise that would stretch far beyond the confines of Nevada territory. But the most horrifying shift, the most profound perversion, occurred within his own soul. He began to view his family not as loved ones to be protected, not as a sanctuary from the chaos, but as mere components in his grand, terrifying design. His wife, his children, they transformed in his eyes from precious beings into potential liabilities, obstacles to be managed, perhaps even eliminated, in service of his ever-expanding, blood-soaked goals. The psychological chains of his ambition, once binding only his victims, now tightened around the very hearts of his own flesh and blood. By the dawn of 1907, Las Vegas had shed its transient skin. No longer a mere tent city, it had solidified into an established railroad town, boasting over 1,500 permanent residents, a burgeoning array of legitimate businesses, and, most ominously for Jeremiah Henderson, the first concrete elements of formal law enforcement. This rapid maturation, while a beacon of opportunity for honest entrepreneurs, cast a long, chilling shadow over men like Jeremiah. For him, the very lawlessness of the frontier had been a shield, a vast, indifferent cloak under which his criminal enterprise could flourish. Now that shield was crumbling. The establishment of a dedicated town marshal's office in early 1907 represented the first truly serious existential threat to Jeremiah's meticulously constructed operation since he had begun his grim harvest some 18 months prior. Marshal William Bill Thompson, a man forged in the unforgiving crucible of railroad detective work, had been hired specifically to confront the spiraling problems of crime and violence that inevitably accompanied Las Vegas's explosive expansion. Thompson's arrival coincided with an unsettling surge in inquiries about missing persons. Territorial authorities in Carson City, railroad companies, mining operations, even law enforcement agencies in distant territories, all had begun asking pointed questions about men who had simply vanished while traveling through the Las Vegas area. While none of these inquiries had yet focused directly on the Henderson homestead, Jeremiah, with the chilling clarity of a cornered predator, understood. His activities, once cloaked in perfect anonymity, were now beginning to attract the precise kind of attention that could prove utterly fatal to his entire blood-soaked empire. The walls of his carefully constructed world were closing in, and he knew it. The threat, once a distant tremor, now vibrated directly beneath Jeremiah Henderson's feet, promising to shatter his carefully constructed world. The attention his activities were drawing, he knew with chilling certainty, could prove fatal. But the solution Jeremiah devised was not retreat. It was not caution. It was a terrifying, audacious leap into even deeper depravity. Rather than reducing his operations, rather than exercising the greater discretion the situation clearly demanded, he chose the unthinkable. He decided to accelerate his timeline. His monstrous goal: to complete the planned 89 murders, to achieve his bloody quota before law enforcement agencies, still disparate and disorganized across the vast territory, could coordinate their investigations effectively. This decision, born of a desperate, cornered ambition, demanded the abandonment of his previous careful selection process. The meticulous vetting, the patient waiting for desperate fugitives to seek his special services, was now a luxury he could no longer afford. He transformed from a selective predator to an indiscriminate hunter. Jeremiah Henderson began actively hunting for victims, roaming the desolate roads, preying on solitary travelers, his moral compass utterly shattered, replaced by the cold, ticking clock of his ambition. This was the dark escalation, the desperate sprint towards his ultimate goal, leaving a trail of blood and fear across the Nevada desert, all to secure a piece of land in a city built on shattered dreams. The threat, once a distant tremor, now vibrated directly beneath Jeremiah Henderson's feet, promising to shatter his carefully constructed world. The attention his activities were drawing, he knew with chilling certainty, could prove fatal. But the solution Jeremiah devised was not retreat. It was not caution. It was a terrifying, audacious leap into even deeper depravity. Rather than reducing his operations, rather than exercising the greater discretion the situation clearly demanded, he chose the unthinkable. He decided to accelerate his timeline. His monstrous goal: to complete the planned 89 murders, to achieve his bloody quota before law enforcement agencies, still disparate and disorganized across the vast territory, could coordinate their investigations effectively. This decision, born of a desperate, cornered ambition, demanded the abandonment of his previous careful selection process. The meticulous vetting, the patient waiting for desperate fugitives to seek his special services, was now a luxury he could no longer afford. He transformed from a selective predator to an indiscriminate hunter. Jeremiah Henderson began actively hunting for victims, roaming the desolate roads, preying on solitary travelers, his moral compass utterly shattered, replaced by the cold, ticking clock of his ambition. This was the dark escalation, the desperate sprint towards his ultimate goal, leaving a trail of blood and fear across the Nevada desert, all to secure a piece of land in a city built on shattered dreams. The relentless acceleration of Jeremiah's murderous enterprise exacted a devastating psychological toll, a slow, agonizing corruption that consumed his own family from within. Sarah, trapped in a waking nightmare, had begun to meticulously document her husband's atrocities in her own secret journal. These were not mere notes. They were a desperate act of defiance, a chilling testament compiled partly as evidence, a last, fragile hope for a future justice, and partly as a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of control over the spiraling horror her life had become. By the summer of 1907, her trembling hand recorded over 60 lives brutally extinguished, and with Jeremiah's timeline accelerating, she knew with a certainty that froze her blood that many, many more would die before he reached his grim 89-body goal. But the most agonizing burden fell upon Samuel Henderson, now a haunted 13-year-old boy. He had moved beyond mere suspicion. Driven by a desperate, morbid curiosity, he had located the very burial ground behind their homestead. He had seen enough to grasp the full, horrifying scope of his father's crimes, to comprehend the silent rows of graves, each a testament to a life brutally stolen. The weight of this knowledge, for a child who still clung to the vestiges of love for his father, was crushing. He could no longer deny the monstrous truth. The man he adored, the man who was meant to protect him, had become an unfeeling, blood-soaked monster. And then the final, terrifying realization that shattered Samuel's world and plunged him into an abyss of terror. He began to understand. His father, consumed by paranoia, now viewed his own family, his wife, his son, not as loved ones, but as inconvenient liabilities. Jeremiah had begun making chilling comments, subtle threats that suggested he was planning to murder both Samuel and his mother once his land acquisition was complete. The architect of death now plotting the demise of his own blood to protect the unspeakable secret of his cursed fortune. The chilling realization that his own father, the man he once loved, now viewed him as a liability to be eliminated, plunged Samuel into a desperate, terrifying struggle for survival. The innocent desert homestead had become a death trap, and his family, caught in the grip of Jeremiah's escalating paranoia, was spiraling towards its inevitable, horrifying end. The choice was clear, stark, and utterly brutal: succumb to the madness, or fight against the very blood that now sought to consume him. This final, desperate act within the Henderson home remains shrouded in whispers and speculation, a grim climax hidden from the history books. What we do know, what the land itself eventually testified to, is the chilling completion of Jeremiah's horrific vision. By the time the railroad surveyor stumbled upon that desolate patch of earth in 1908, the count was complete. 89 graves, 89 lives systematically extinguished to fuel one man's monstrous ambition for a land deed in a burgeoning city. The Henderson's harvest was full, and the truth? It was buried again. Local residents, the architects of Las Vegas's shiny new future, claimed no knowledge of any cemetery in that location. The newly formed territorial records conveniently showed no permits for such an extensive burial ground. For over 70 years, the Union Pacific Railroad, fearing the scandal, quietly rerouted their tracks to avoid the site, becoming an unwitting accomplice in the cover-up. The few locals who knew of its existence spoke of it only in whispers, the name Henderson's Harvest, a chilling secret shared among the knowing. This is the horrifying legacy of the Henderson Family Curse: 89 bodies for one land deed. A truth so profound, so utterly devastating in its revelation of human depravity and institutional manipulation, that it changes a man forever once he hears it. You have heard it now, and the desert still holds its breath.